Question 2, Annabel Goldie. Order.
Presiding Officer, to ask the First Minister when he will next meet the Secretary of State for Scotland.
First Minister.
No plans to meet the Secretary of State in the near future.
Annabel Goldie.
Presiding Officer, today in Scotland we have over 1,000 more police officers than we had 4 years ago. And just before the First Minister indulges in selective amnesia, I would remind him that was only made possible because of the Scottish Conservatives. And if it had been left to Labour, there wouldn't be any more police officers at all. And if it had been left to the SNP, there would be 500 fewer. Presiding Officer, maintaining these extra 1,000 officers is a political priority for me and the Scottish Conservatives, not just for this year, but for the next 4 years. That's my commitment, that's the Scottish Conservative commitment, keeping these 1,000 extra police, not just for 1 year, but for the next 4 years. Will the First Minister match it?
First Minister.
Yes, I will.
Annabel Goldie.
I'm absolutely delighted at that response. And
Order.
And I welcome that apparent clarity, and I congratulate the First Minister on yet again following a Conservative lead. But I have to take his assurances with a pinch of salt. He did, after all, try to break the self-same commitment 4 years ago.
Yes.
And that was naughty, and I had to tweak him back. Mind you, Presiding Officer, at least he had a commitment which was more than Labour, who had none then and have none now. But, Presiding Officer, isn't the simple fact that when it comes to keeping Scotland safe and protecting our public, Labour is silent, the SNP is soft, and the only people you can trust are the Scottish Conservatives?
First Minister.
Well, when Annabel was upbraiding me there, I was thinking matron definitely knows best in terms of what I must do and don't do. Look, I accept, incidentally, that some of the key commitments that we've been able to achieve, because we've appealed for support across the chamber. And I'm perfectly happy to acknowledge the Conservative Party's support, which was essential in delivering the 1,000 extra police officers, just as, for example, the Liberal Democrats' support was essential in terms of removing tuition fees, back-end tuition fees in Scotland. That is the inevitability of minority government. But what I'd say to Annabel is, let's look at the justice and policing policy in the round. I believe the reason we have not just the lowest crime rate in Scotland for 30 years, but for the first time people's fear of crime in communities falling, is precisely because we have these extra officers in the streets of Scotland. That, to me, is the essence of what we should be trying to do, and indeed together we have achieved, to at least some extent, in these last few years. But I would just gently remind Annabel Goldie that she should cast a look at what her colleagues are doing south of the border, because it does seem to me, in terms of a number of aspects of approach to crime and punishment, it seems to me that Kenneth Clarke seems to be following not Annabel Goldie's prescription and policies, but the SNP government in Scotland's prescription and policies. I think Kenneth Clarke is wise to see that short sentences have very little value compared to the alternative forms of punishment. I think he is wise to follow that line, and of course that was a policy which was put through this Parliament, not with the support of the Conservative Party, but with the support of the Liberal Democrats. But over the piece, I think we can say that together we have achieved substantial things in the justice policy of Scotland. And what really matters is the police in the streets are leading to a 30-year low in recorded crime in Scotland.
Question 3, Tavish Scott.
Thank you, Presiding Officer. To ask the First Minister what issues will be discussed at the next meeting of his Cabinet.
The next meeting of the Cabinet will discuss issues of importance to the people of Scotland.
Tavish Scott.
Thank you. The Scottish Government has withdrawn all figures to support its assertion in favour of a national police force. Will the First Minister therefore guarantee to publish robust and validated new figures that show the full cost of setting up a single police force, including a new headquarters, enhanced redundancies and IT?
Mr. Minister.
Well, that is what we are bringing forward as part of the consultation process that Kenny McCaskill outlined yesterday. I think Tavish Scott will have to face what is a certain fact. that the opportunities for cost savings in the back office in a single police force are very substantial indeed. And if he is going to argue against the single police force, as I assume he is, then he has to base his arguments on whether or not those advocates of the single force can ensure the democratic line of accountability and local contribution to policing in Scotland. I think it is there that the answers have to be found in terms of the proposal for a single police force, not with respect in trying to pretend that a single police force is not going to offer substantial savings in the back office that can be deployed in the front line.
Well, I agree with the First Minister that this is an important debate, but he needs to surely accept that Labour's police reorganisation in England was cancelled because it was going to cost £500 million. Hasn't he read the papers for his own Scottish Policing Board? The government's own improvement service said supporting evidence is caveated almost to the point of parody. The analysis is an abuse of evidence. And David Strang, the Chief Constable of Lothian and Borders, called the figures in the draft irresponsibly misleading and not supported by the evidence. And as Mr Salmon knows, his own Chief Constable, Colin McCurshus, said there was not a shred of evidence for a single police force. So is it normal for his government to make an assertion first and look for the evidence afterwards? What evidence can he produce to show that his government has the slightest clue about how much this centralisation will cost?
Well, two things. Clearly there is a substantial body of opinion in the police force and elsewhere in favour of a single force. The Chief Constable of Strathclyde, the Deputy Chief Constable of Lothian and Borders, and senior police officers such as that would not be arguing the case unless they believed there was a substantial opportunity to be found in a single police force. As far as his initial part of his second question, I can give Tavish Scott this assurance. We shall not, in terms of making the greatest change in the police service of Scotland for more than a generation, be following any prescription from what the Labour Party tried to do and abandoned south of the border. And if he is saying that the confusion and disarray that happened when Labour were in charge of police reform in England is another argument for making sure they are never in a position to reintroduce confusion and disarray in Scotland, then in this new year I agree with Tavish Scott.
I'll take a supplementary from Duncan McNeill.
Presiding officer, earlier this week I was contacted by Blair's of Greenock, a manufacturing company with a great reputation which has been operating successfully in the constituency for more than a century. With the bad news that despite sacrifices of the workforce and the commitment of management, they have been forced by the economic downturn to call in the receivers and make 100 employees redundant. There remains a short window, a very short window, possibly as little as 48 hours, where this company can be preserved as a going concern or alternatively faces being broken up, which would be an act of economic vandalism. Will the First Minister add his support to the management and the workforce fighting to salvage something from this grave situation, and ask what the First Minister can do to impress upon the insolvency practitioners and the banks, in this case the Bank of Scotland, that they need to look beyond the narrow and short-term financial considerations and face up to their wider responsibility to jobs and the local economy in these difficult times.
First Minister.
Can I say two things to the constituency member? Of course, I'll arrange for the Finance Secretary to immediately contact him and indeed to establish where an intervention is possible. It would be helpful, as we do, as I'm sure Duncan McNeill is aware, in the cases such as this across the country. If we can help, we certainly shall intervene to help. I know that Duncan McNeill would also be the first person to welcome the jobs boost from Amazon affecting his constituency as well as Fife. And he will reflect that one of the most positive signs in terms of the economic statistics that we have in Scotland at the present moment is that manufacturing is doing extremely well over the piece. Well, that doesn't mean, of course, there are individual companies which are still encountering difficulties, and of course the access to finance and the attitude of the financial organisations is often a contributing cause of these difficulties.
Further supplementary from Alison McInnes.
Thank you very much, Presiding Officer. The First Minister will be aware of the significant job losses announced at the Les Taylor Group of companies based at Mintlaw and Ellen in my region. 164 people lost their jobs last Friday and a further 19 on Monday of this week. This is a significant loss of jobs within the rural economy of Aberdeenshire. What actions can he and his ministers take to support those who have lost their jobs and minimise the impact on the local economy? And will he ensure that a PACE team is mobilised to assist?
First Minister.
Well, yes, I shall, and a PACE team is being deployed to assist in the position. I'm very well aware of the company, its background and its history. It was a company in my former Westminster parliamentary constituency. As Alison McInnes well knows, that Les Taylor himself died tragically last year. Of course, losing somebody of his ability and skill, it was a serious blow to the and leadership was a serious blow to the company. But I will ensure, as I know the PACE team is mobilised, and I'm perfectly happy to arrange for the economic ministers to meet Alison McInnes to talk about